Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Science Galaxy channel. Right now, as night falls and the outside world gradually grows quiet, you are standing beneath a sky more ancient than anything we have ever known. The light your eyes cannot see, but your imagination can reach, left distant stars billions of years ago, crossed vast emptiness, and arrived at this very moment, your moment. Allow your breathing to slow. Let your thoughts settle. In that stillness, humanity becomes very small, humbly facing a vast universe that moves silently onward. We do not need to understand everything. We only need to listen. Listen to the deep pulse of space, of time, of the mysteries that are still whispering out there. Tonight, science is in no hurry to answer. It tells a story. And all you need to do is let yourself drift along, slowly, peacefully, allowing sleep to arrive as a natural part of the universe itself. The greatest question: what is the universe made of? There was a very special moment in the history of human understanding. Not loud like an invention, not dazzling like a revolution, but quiet. Like the instant we pause in the middle of the night and realize everything we thought was familiar makes up only a tiny fraction of reality. The universe, it turns out, is not made of what we can see. The glittering stars, the swirling galaxies, the glowing clouds of gas like cosmic paintings, no matter how magnificent they are merely a fragile outer layer of something far deeper, darker, and far more elusive. Humanity has come a long way. We have measured the age of the universe, traced the echoes of the Big Bang, and mapped immense structures stretching across billions of light years. We have named particles, forces, and equations, as if by naming them, we could make the world feel familiar. Yet just as confidence begins to take root, the universe softly whispers something else. Most of what exists does not shine, does not reflect, does not reveal itself to any of our senses or direct instruments. It is there, but it has no form. It acts, but it does not speak. And it is precisely this silence that unsettles us the most. Imagine standing in a vast room, softly lit where everything familiar lies clearly within view. You believe you understand the room. Then suddenly, someone tells you that what you see makes up less than 5% of what is actually there. The rest cannot be seen or touched, yet it determines the shape of the room, the position of the walls, and even how you move within it. That feeling is both overwhelming and deeply humbling. This is exactly what cosmology brought us when we realized that familiar matter, atoms, stars, planets, the human body, is only a small slice of the full picture. For centuries, light was astronomy's faithful guide. We learned how to read it, analyze it, split it into spectra to understand the composition and motion of celestial objects. Light told us ancient stories of stars that died long ago, whose traces are still traveling toward Earth. Through light, we felt as though we had touched the essence of the universe. But light also revealed its limits. It tells us only about what emits light, and the universe is under no obligation to reveal all its secrets through illumination. And so, from the most precise measurements, from observations that seemed beyond doubt, a quiet paradox emerged. Galaxies move not as they should. Space expands at a pace that defies intuition. The numbers no longer fit the old story. Instead of denying the data, science had to listen to it. And the data was saying this: something is present everywhere, massive and powerful, yet completely invisible. This was the moment science entered a state very much like meditation. No longer conquest, but deep observation. Not what do we know, but what do we not know? Dark matter and dark energy were not born of imagination, but of honesty. They are temporary names, labels placed upon gaps in our understanding. They do not say, "We have understood," but rather, "There is something here waiting to be understood." There is a strange beauty in accepting the invisible. It forces us to change how we approach reality. Instead of asking, "What does it look like?" we ask, "What traces does it leave behind?" Instead of demanding clear answers, we learn to read subtle consequences. Like the wind, we do not see it, but we see the leaves move. Like time, we cannot grasp it, but we see everything change. The universe, in much of its nature, seems to work the same way, present through its effects, not its form. And here, the feeling of knowing without understanding becomes deepest. We know that most of the universe is not made of the shimmering stars in the night sky. We know that invisible components govern the structure and destiny of all space. We even know their proportions with astonishing precision. But knowing is not the same as understanding. Knowing is seeing the outline. Understanding is touching the essence. And between the two lies a vast silence. That silence is not failure. It is an invitation to let go of the illusion that humanity stands at the center of knowledge, that the light of intellect has illuminated every corner of existence. Before the universe, we return to our most primal state. Listeners, listening to numbers, to tiny discrepancies, to unexpected motions, listening even to silence, because sometimes silence speaks the loudest. When we realize that most of the universe is invisible, a subtle transformation occurs in how we see ourselves. Our bodies, our thoughts, our daily worries suddenly feel lighter. Not because they are unimportant, but because they no longer carry the burden of being the center of everything. We are part of a much larger story, one woven not only from what is revealed, but also from what lies hidden beneath the surface. In this state, science is no longer dry. It becomes a form of contemplation. Every equation is an open question. Every observation is a quiet bow before the unknown. Dark matter and dark energy, in their deepest sense, are not merely physical concepts. They are reminders that reality is broader than our perception, that understanding must always walk hand in hand with humility. And perhaps that humility is the greatest gift the universe offers humanity. When we stop demanding immediate answers, stop forcing everything to be brightly lit, the mind begins to settle. We allow ourselves to remain within the question the way we remain with the breath during meditation. No need to solve, no need to control, only to be present with vastness. In the stillness of the night, as the sky stretches overhead and light from ancient stars continues its journey, we understand that not knowing is not frightening. Fear arises only when we pretend that we already know everything. When we accept the invisible, accept that most of the universe lies beyond our current understanding, we enter a different state, a state of openness. There, science and meditation meet. One side holds the longing to understand, the other, the ability to let go. And between the two, humanity finds a strange peace. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of standing before a mystery greater than oneself. The universe does not require us to understand it in order to exist within it. It simply continues to be vast, invisible, and profound. And in that very personal moment, when we realize we are living within a reality whose essence remains largely hidden, something gentle happens. The mind slows down. The questions soften. We no longer try to grasp the universe. We allow the universe to gently hold us instead. Knowing without understanding is no longer a deficiency. It becomes an open space where curiosity and calm coexist. Dark matter. What holds galaxies together? From the moment humanity accepted that most of the universe is invisible, another door quietly opened. When light was no longer enough to tell the whole story, science was compelled to learn how to listen to subtler things, signals without form, yet leaving unmistakable marks in the motions of the cosmos. And in that silence, a new question began to echo. Not loudly, but persistently. If most of the universe does not shine, how do we know it is there? Imagine standing on the bank of a wide river at night. The water is pitch black, reflecting no moonlight, revealing no current. But when you drop a leaf into it, you see it being carried away, speeding up, changing direction. You cannot see the water, yet you know it is flowing. The universe is much the same. It does not reveal its full nature, but it leaves traces in the way galaxies move, in the steady rotation of billions of stars quietly circling an unseen center. When astronomers began measuring the rotation speeds of galaxies, they expected nothing particularly strange. According to intuition and familiar gravity, stars farther from the center should move more slowly, like passengers on the outer edge of a spinning ride who would be flung away without enough force holding them in. But once again, the universe refused to follow the familiar script. Stars at the edges of galaxies did not slow down. They moved fast, so fast that if only visible matter were present, those galaxies should have torn themselves apart long ago. That moment was like listening to a familiar piece of music and suddenly sensing a deep bass note beneath it. So deep you don't hear it with your ears, but feel it in your chest. Something was there, unseen, untouchable, yet undeniable. The numbers, cold and precise, began to whisper the same message. There is more mass present, a great deal more. Mass that does not shine, does not emit signals, yet is strong enough to hold galaxies together across billions of years. From here, the story becomes more intimate, like a meditative metaphor for invisible support. We often believe that what keeps the world functioning must be what we can see. Pillars, foundations, solid walls. Yet, in our inner lives, we know there are unseen things that keep us upright. The breath, awareness, a vague but very real sense of safety. Dark matter, in a strange way, resembles those invisible sustaining forces. It does not call attention to itself. It simply does its work, quietly preventing the universe from falling into chaos. Galaxies spin like ancient dances. Each star is a dancer, each orbit a step repeated billions of times. But for the dance not to fall apart, there must be an invisible stage, a supporting structure the eye cannot see. Dark matter is that stage. It surrounds galaxies like a vast embrace, not gripping tightly, not imposing, yet firm enough for everything to continue moving in harmony. What makes this story profound lies not only in the phenomenon itself, but in how it changes the human perspective. We once believed that understanding the universe meant understanding what was brightest and clearest. Now, it is precisely what is dark and unclear that becomes the key. We learn to trust presence without form. We learn to accept that not everything important must appear before our eyes. When you look up at the night sky, you see bands of glittering stars, but you do not see what holds them together. It has no color. It reflects no light. It leaves no direct trace in telescopes. Yet, if it vanished, the The sky you are looking at would no longer exist as it does now. Galaxies would drift apart, stars would scatter, and the large-scale structure of the universe would dissolve like a dream, ended too abruptly. There is a strange comfort in the idea that the universe is held together by something invisible. It echoes the feeling in meditation when you relax your body and realize you do not need to tense yourself in order to exist. Something deeper than personal effort is holding you here. On the largest scale, the universe is being supported in much the same way. Dark matter is not a complete answer. It is an honest admission, a way of saying, we see the effects, but we do not yet know the essence. And it is precisely this honesty that makes science beautiful. Instead of hiding ignorance, it names the gap and keeps moving forward. It allows us to remain in a state of knowing that something is present, even if we cannot yet fully name it. When scientists draw galaxy rotation curves, they are not merely sketching graphs. They are outlining the boundary between the known and the unknown. Each unexpectedly flat curve is a reminder that the universe is not as simple as our earliest models suggested. It is richer, deeper, and rarely confined within the limits of human intuition. And then, a very human feeling arises. The feeling of standing before something greater than oneself without being threatened by it. Dark matter does not destroy. It preserves. It does not tear the universe apart. It binds it together. In a world that often associates darkness with danger, this invisibility plays a gentle role, the role of stability. Perhaps that is why, when we tell this story at night, the voice naturally slows, not because it lacks drama, but because the phenomenon itself carries the slow rhythm of the cosmos. Billions of years pass. The galaxies continue to spin, held in place by something we have not yet seen. No urgency, no panic, only steady, patient motion. And as you lie there listening to this story, something subtle may be happening. You are not only hearing about the universe, you are learning a gentle lesson about trust. Trusting that not everything supporting life needs to be visible. Trusting that there are invisible adhesives quietly keeping both the universe and you from drifting out of orbit. In this feeling, science and meditation meet once again. On one side are data, measurements, and cold numbers. On the other is lived experience, the sensation of being held, of being supported. Dark matter stands at that intersection, whispering that this world is built not only from what is revealed, but also from what quietly stands behind it. And perhaps, in accepting this, it becomes easier to let go of ourselves as well. Like the stars at the edges of galaxies, we do not need to fear being flung away. A deeper order is at work. An invisible structure is holding everything together. And in that realization, the mind can slow, the breath can deepen, and sleep can arrive as a natural, gentle motion, following its rightful orbit within the vast universe. Evidence. When light is bent. Once the mind has grown accustomed to the idea that an invisible supporting force is holding galaxies together, it naturally wishes to take one step further. Not to rush toward conclusions, but to seek a subtler sign, a gentle yet reliable way of verification. If that invisible presence truly exists, if it is not merely a hypothesis invented to patch mismatched numbers, then it must leave some kind of imprint upon light itself, the universe's most faithful messenger. And indeed, light, in the course of its long journey, has unintentionally revealed something it never meant to disclose. We tend to think of light as straightforward and honest. It travels along seemingly simple paths, racing through space at a constant speed, carrying information from stars that went dark millions of years ago. Yet in the universe, even light is not completely free. It must bow to mass. It must bend when passing through regions of space that have been pulled into a curve by gravity. This is not a poetic notion, but a profound consequence of how the universe is woven together. Space and time are not a rigid backdrop, but a flexible fabric, one that can be stretched, curved, and set into motion. Imagine sitting in meditation and observing the breath. You cannot see the breath, yet you feel its movement through the chest, the abdomen, the gentle rise and fall. Light in the universe behaves in much the same way. We do not directly see what causes it to bend, but we do see the slight deviations in its path. And these deviations, when observed with enough patience, become the most trustworthy whispers of all. When light from a distant galaxy passes through a region of space filled with great mass, its path no longer remains as straight as we expect. The image of that galaxy reaches us stretched, distorted, sometimes even multiplied into faint, ghostly copies. Through a telescope, these appear as arcs of light, soft curves, as if the cosmic canvas had been subtly redrawn by an invisible hand. And within those curves, science finds evidence that needs no justification. What makes this phenomenon profound is not merely that light is bent, but that it is bent more than visible matter alone could possibly account for. When scientists reconstruct maps of mass from these curved traces of light, they discover something striking. The regions where light bends most strongly do not coincide with where stars or glowing gas are most concentrated. It is as if an invisible body is present, heavy enough to curve space, yet refusing to reveal itself through light. This moment is like walking into a room and clearly sensing that someone has just left. There is no person, no silhouette, yet the air still stirs, objects feel slightly displaced. You do not need to see anyone to know there was a presence. Through bent light, the universe leaves behind a similar impression. Without direct sight, we can still follow the traces. Here, science is no longer guessing. It shifts into a slower, steadier rhythm. Instead of asking, what if it exists, it asks, how did the light travel? And light, brutally honest, answers through its own distortion. Every curve is a confirmation that mass does not reside only where things shine. Every stretched image is evidence that reality runs far deeper than its surface. There is a distinctly meditative beauty in how this evidence reveals itself. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It requires patience, repetition, and the ability to sit still long enough to notice very small differences. In meditation, too, we do not seek dramatic experiences. We observe subtle changes, a longer breath, a deeper stillness. When the universe speaks of the invisible, it chooses to speak just as gently. As mass maps are drawn from these distortions of light, a new picture emerges. It is not a picture of glittering stars, but one of vast, invisible regions of heaviness, broader and deeper than anything light alone reveals. These regions do not align with brightness. They envelop, guide, and sometimes extend far beyond what the eye can detect. This does not merely strengthen a hypothesis. It transforms how we imagine the structure of the universe itself. Instead of empty space dotted with luminous objects, we begin to see an ocean of invisible mass, with light acting like ripples on its surface. Galaxies, in this view, resemble lamps hung within a deeper framework, unseen yet undeniably real. Their light helps us orient ourselves, but it does not tell the whole story. This realization brings a unique feeling to the mind. On one hand, it reinforces trust that science is not built on imagination alone. On the other, it reminds us that evidence does not always appear where we expect it. Some truths reveal themselves only indirectly, when we accept that not everything shows up in the places we are looking. In this context, light becomes a neutral witness. It has no idea what it is revealing. It simply travels, bending in response to whatever it encounters along the way. That very indifference is what makes its testimony so trustworthy. It does not intend to prove or disprove anything. It merely responds to the structure of space, and in doing so, reveals that structure to us. One could say that, at this moment, science reaches a kind of stillness. It no longer argues loudly about whether the invisible exists. It simply listens to the light, and light, after billions of years of travel, delivers a very clear message. The mass of the universe does not coincide with its light. This realization carries a healing quality as well. It teaches us that not everything important stands at the center of attention. In human life, the deepest values are often unseen. Safety, trust, the feeling of being supported, these are hard to see. Yet their absence is felt immediately. Through bent light, the universe is telling the same story on the grandest scale. As you listen to this, you may no longer feel the need to imagine the shape of that invisible presence. Instead, you begin to sense it through its consequences. You allow yourself to trust subtle traces, and in that trust, the mind can slow. There's no need to rush to conclusions, no need to grasp everything. Light continues its journey, bent by heavy regions of space, until it finally reaches our eyes. Along the way, it is altered, but its message is not distorted. It brings a gentle reminder that reality is not as simple as what we see. The deeper layers are at work, quietly and persistently. And here, scientific certainty and inner calm meet. We do not need direct sight in order to believe. We need only observe long enough to recognize the effects. As in meditation, when we stop trying to control the breath and allow it to reveal its own rhythm, we begin to feel a deeper stability. Through bent light, the universe is revealing its rhythm as well, a rhythm guided not only by what shines, but by what remains unseen. And as we let this story sink in, without haste, without further analysis, a very gentle feeling arises. The sense of being surrounded by a vast, subtle structure in which everything has its place, even if not everything can be seen. In that feeling, you may let go. Light has done its work. It has shown us that the invisible is not merely an idea, but a very real part of the universe. The rest does not need to be resolved right now. You only need to be here, in the stillness, allowing the story to continue flowing, slowly and softly, just as light itself has flowed through the universe for billions of years to arrive at this moment. What we have sought, and still have not seen, after light had borne witness for itself, after its subtle curves had traced maps of an invisible mass spread throughout space, humanity felt as though it had come very close to touching the secret. A very natural feeling arose at that moment. If we have seen the footprints, then the one who left them must be somewhere. Something that can be found, something that can be named. And so science, with all its patience and humility, began a longer, quieter, yet deeply hopeful search. A search not aimed at the sky, but directed downward, into the depths of the earth, into silent laboratories, where even the smallest vibrations are carefully listened for. Delicate instruments were built, not to observe light, but to wait for collisions so rare they are almost impossible. Scientists dug deep beneath mountains, shielding themselves from the noise of the surface world, creating spaces of near-perfect stillness. In that stillness, science waited, waiting for a tiny signal, a faint sign that the invisible presence was not only shaping the motions of galaxies, but might also gently touch the familiar world around us. There is something deeply meditative in this act of waiting. No force, no haste, simply creating the conditions and then listening. Years passed, the instruments continued to record data patiently, moment by moment, vibration by vibration. But the universe, as always, was in no rush to answer. The expected collisions did not arrive, or if they did, they were too ambiguous to confirm anything. What remained was a long sequence of very scientific silences. Within those silences, the sense of mystery did not fade. On the contrary, it grew deeper. Each time a beautiful hypothesis failed to be confirmed, science did not treat it as failure, but as a reminder that nature has no obligation to conform to human expectations, no matter how reasonable or refined those expectations may be. We can build elegant models and tidy ideas, but the universe is not bound by the aesthetic preferences of the human mind. At times, in the course of the search, humanity turned toward gentler, more subtle ideas. Entities imagined as delicate waves spread throughout space, requiring no strong collisions to reveal their existence. Scientists listened to extremely narrow frequencies, as if searching for a single note within an infinite symphony. Yet even there, the answer continued to quietly evade them. Not a firm refusal, but a gentle postponement that prolonged the sense of waiting. Sometimes, the search ventured even farther, into regions where the boundary between matter and concept begins to blur. Possibilities were considered, then set aside, like stones tested upon the surface of water. Some sank immediately. Some floated briefly before disappearing. Each possibility left behind a small ripple in our understanding, even if it never became the final answer. Throughout this journey, one thing slowly became clear. Not through a single great discovery, but through the accumulation of absences. Perhaps the force holding galaxies together does not resemble any kind of particle we are familiar with. Perhaps it is not a thing in the usual sense at all. Perhaps the question itself carried an unspoken assumption from the beginning that everything in the universe must be built from small, discrete, countable pieces. Yet time and again, the universe has shown that it does not always follow such convenient patterns. Like in meditation, we sometimes search for a special sensation, a clear state, a definite sign that we are on the right path. But the more we search, the more we realize that the searching itself creates tension. When expectations are released, when we accept that not every experience has a clear shape, a deeper stillness emerges. Science, on this journey, is learning a similar lesson. Years of not finding direct evidence have not made the mystery smaller. They have allowed it to ripen. Each non-detection expands the space of possibilities. The universe seems to whisper, "Perhaps your tools have not yet reached the right depth. Perhaps your language is not yet flexible enough. Or perhaps what you are seeking does not wish to be found in that way." This does not weaken science. On the contrary, it reveals one of its most beautiful qualities, the ability to acknowledge limits. In a world that often celebrates fast, definitive answers, science dares to remain with long questions. It dares to say, we do not yet know, and to continue observing. This is not helplessness, it is honesty. There is a deep resonance between this moment in science and the contemplative state of human life. When we face the great questions of existence, meaning, being, death, we often have no clear answers either. Yet, it is precisely the act of staying with the question, of not fleeing from it, that gives life its depth. Through its graceful elusiveness, the universe is inviting us into a similar space. The more humanity searches, the more it realizes that the invisible presence resists being confined. It does not allow itself to be captured in a single moment, a single experiment. It is like a low, continuous background note, always present, never overpowering. We sense it through the whole, through large-scale structure, through stability sustained across billions of years, rather than through any single, isolated signal. And so, in the quiet of underground laboratories, a new thought slowly takes shape. Perhaps what we are looking for is not a single particle, not an isolated entity. Perhaps it is a distributed mode of existence, a property of space itself, or a way in which the universe organizes itself. This thought does not close the mystery. It opens new doors, wider and more elusive. Here, the feeling of mystery no longer carries disappointment. It becomes a companion, a reminder that the universe is not in a hurry to be understood, that understanding is not a hunt, but a gradual process of familiarity. Like sitting in darkness long enough for the eyes to begin distinguishing subtle shades that once did not exist at all. Science, in this search, is also adjusting its eyes. It learns to look more indirectly, more slowly. It expands its questions instead of narrowing them. And in that expansion, something deeply human emerges. Humility. Not every mystery can be forced into the open. Some things reveal themselves only when we are willing to change how we look. As you listen to this story in the night, you may sense a gentle parallel with your own personal searches. There are things you know are important, whose presence you feel in your life, yet you cannot name them, cannot grasp them. You search, experiment, hope, and then return again to uncertainty. Yet within that uncertainty, a new depth appears. Through its refusal to be easily found, the universe is teaching us how to remain with the unknown. Without panic, without discouragement, simply continuing to listen, to observe, with a softer mind. Perhaps the invisible is not an object to be captured, but a reminder that reality is broader than any framework we have built. And in that feeling, the search itself ceases to be a tense pursuit. It becomes a meditative journey, where every step has value, even when it does not yield immediate answers. Mystery is no longer a void to be filled, but a space in which awareness can expand. As laboratories remain silent, as instruments continue to wait, the universe keeps turning, keeps holding galaxies together, keeps bending light as it always has. The invisible does not vanish simply because we have not yet found it. It continues to exist, calmly, as a foundational part of reality. And perhaps that calmness is the deepest message of all. Not everything needs to be understood immediately in order to matter. Not every mystery must be solved for us to rest. In accepting our limits, humanity finds a rare kind of peace. A peace that comes from knowing we live in a universe still rich with discovery, and that not knowing does not make the world any less beautiful. In that quiet darkness, the story continues, unhurried. And you, as a small part of a universe listening to itself, may allow yourself to let go. For sometimes, Not finding the answer right away is not a sign of being stuck, but an invitation into another depth, where science and contemplation meet in a silence full of meaning. Dark matter, the skeleton of the universe. After all the searches carried out in silence, after underground laboratories patiently listening without receiving a clear reply, a different realization slowly begins to emerge. Perhaps the invisible thing does not need to be caught as an isolated particle. Perhaps it does not need to knock on our instruments through a rare collision. Perhaps its role is not to reveal itself at all, but to quietly arrange the stage on which everything else can appear. When this thought arises, the picture of the universe subtly changes. Deeper, quieter. Much like the moment in meditation when we stop trying to grasp a thought and allow it to dissolve on its own. Let us return to a very early moment when the universe was young, hot, and chaotic. Space had not yet taken on the clear shapes of galaxies or stars. Familiar matter, the kind that now makes up our bodies, was still tightly entangled with light in a dense, turbulent dance. Everything was too energetic to settle, too radiant to clump together. If only these components had existed, the universe might have passed through its early phase without ever becoming calm enough for structure to form. But within that chaos, there was another component, quieter, untouched by light, unscattered by collisions. It began to do what light and ordinary matter could not. It started to gather. Slightly denser regions formed, not through explosions or drama, but through patience. Tiny fluctuations in density were preserved, not erased by radiation. Gradually, over timescales far beyond human intuition, those fluctuations became deep wells in space. And then, as the universe cooled, as light loosened its grip on every small motion, familiar matter began to feel those wells. It fell into them, the way water flows toward low ground. No guidance was required, no intention, simply a response to a structure that was already there. Seen this way, the formation of galaxies is no longer a random miracle, but the natural outcome of an invisible foundation laid in advance. The first stars did not appear in empty nothingness, but in gravitational cradles already prepared. Clouds of gas did not collapse by chance. They were guided by a deeper order. And within that order, the invisible component played the role of a framework, unseen, unglamorous, yet indispensable. There is something deeply meditative in contemplating this role. In life, we often focus on moments of intensity, success, crisis, bright turning points. But if we slow down long enough, we begin to see that what allows those moments to happen are the quiet structures underneath. Daily habits, steady breathing, the body's stability. They draw little attention, yet without them, everything collapses. The universe, on its grandest scale, appears to operate by the same principle. When cosmological simulations are run on powerful machines, something remarkable happens. If the invisible component is removed, if the universe is made of luminous matter alone, the resulting structures never resemble what we observe. Galaxies fail to form properly, clusters lack coherence, and everything becomes too smooth, too washed out. But when the invisible foundation is included, a network emerges. Long filaments, dense nodes, vast empty regions, woven together into a picture that mirrors what telescopes reveal. It is as if the universe is saying, "This is how I organize myself when all necessary elements are present." In this picture, galaxies are not isolated entities, but points of light attached to a much larger structure. They are like dewdrops, clinging to a spider's web at dawn, bright and visible, yet not responsible for the shape of the web itself. The web, unseen in the darkness, determines the overall order. Without it, the droplets would have nowhere to cling, dissolving back into emptiness. This realization lifts the story beyond the question of what the invisible is, and toward what it does. And the answer, though incomplete, carries a particular weight. It allows everything else to exist. Not by directly creating stars or planets, but by making their existence possible. It is not the main character in the cosmic play, but the stage, the backstage, the supporting frame, without which the play could not unfold at all. Here, the sense of mystery no longer feels like a lack, but like gratitude. Instead of asking why we have not yet found the essence of the invisible, we begin to see that it is precisely because of it that there is anything to find at all. Without it, there would be no stars to observe, no galaxies to measure, no light to bend, and there would be no complex atoms to combine into molecules, into life, into the human beings now asking these questions. In this contemplative state, a very gentle thought arises. Our existence is bound to things we will never directly see, not only in the universe, but within our own bodies. Gravity holds us against the bed, yet we rarely think of it. Automatic systems regulate heartbeat and breath, noticed only when they falter. The universe is the same. It is supported by mechanisms deeper than light, and we begin to notice them only when we ask why everything is so remarkably stable. When you look up at the night sky with this awareness, stars are no longer just distant points of light. They become living evidence of a foundational order. Each burning star confirms that the right conditions once existed for it to form. Each rotating galaxy testifies to an invisible framework, keeping that motion from falling apart. And each human being is a late but very real outcome of that chain of conditions stretching across billions of years. This brings a very particular feeling, a sense of belonging. Not belonging to a specific place, but to a process far larger than oneself. We are not isolated accidents in a random universe, but natural expressions of a structure prepared long before us. This awareness does not breed arrogance. On the contrary, it gives rise to deep humility. We realize that we stand upon invisible supports, both literally and metaphorically. In meditation, there are moments when we touch a profound sense of being held, as if no effort is required to exist. Everything is simply supported. Seen through this lens, the universe offers a similar feeling. It is not as chaotic as we once feared. It has structure, and that structure does not need to be loud in order to be effective. The elevation of meaning here does not come from adding drama, but from recognizing the foundational role of the invisible. It is not just one piece of the picture. It is the frame on which the picture hangs. Without it, the picture would have nowhere to appear. And in that realization, the story of the universe becomes more intimate. Not because we understand everything, but because we perceive the deep connection between the very large and the very small. As you lie there listening to this story unfold, a very gentle calm may begin to form. Not because all questions have been answered, but because you sense that existence is not as fragile as it once seemed. Deeper structures are at work, quietly, persistently, and because of them, you can lie here, breathing, listening, allowing the mind to slow. The universe does not require us to understand it fully in order to continue existing, but realizing that we are supported by unseen structures may help us loosen the need to control everything. Like galaxies, we can continue moving along our own orbits, trusting that a deeper order is holding things together, allowing stars to form, allowing life to emerge, and allowing small moments like this one, a moment of listening and rest, to unfold naturally. And in that realization, the story of the universe becomes more than a scientific account. It becomes a gentle reminder that existence, from the largest structures to the most private experiences, is always supported by things we do not see, but can feel, if we become still enough to listen. After we understand that these silent structures have quietly supported the formation of stars, of galaxies, and of ourselves, a very natural feeling arises, a feeling of reassurance, that the universe, vast and distant as it is, still operates according to laws we can understand, that gravity, with its role of pulling things together and holding them fast, is the common thread running through the entire story. But just as that reassurance settles in, the universe gently tilts and whispers something entirely different, something that does not destroy the old picture, but turns it inside out. Humanity once believed that after its violent birth, space would gradually slow down. This intuition is deeply human. What is thrown outward must eventually be pulled back. Strong motion must eventually settle. Gravity, after all, is the force of return. It gathers, it binds, and it allows the universe to mature slowly over time. For a long while, science believed this too. The question was not whether the universe was slowing down, but how quickly it was doing so. And then, from very distant starlight, from faint points of brightness, visible only when the sky is utterly still, an unexpected signal appeared. Not a bang, not a spectacular image, but a tiny shift in brightness. Stars that explode at the end of their lives, long used as markers of cosmic distance, appeared farther away than they should have been, as if the space between them and us had been stretched quietly, while their light was on its way. That moment is like realizing, in meditation, that the breath has not only slowed, but has become lighter, wider, as though the chest is no longer a boundary. Something subtle has changed, yet it transforms the entire experience. The universe, it turns out, is not slowing down at all. It is accelerating. Space is not merely expanding. It is expanding faster and faster. This defies every familiar intuition. Gravity, the force that holds galaxies together, that gathers matter to give birth to stars and planets, should have been dominant. And yet, something else is speaking here. Not by pulling, but by pushing. Not by gathering, but by separating. An energy that permeates space itself, unfocused, formless, yet powerful enough to cause space to expand from within. This shift from mass to energy is a genuine shock, not only to science, but to the human sense of reality. We are used to thinking that what has weight is what matters. That the heavier something is, the more influence it has on the cosmic story. And yet here, it is precisely something without shape, without mass in the familiar sense, that is setting the rhythm of all space. There is something deeply meditative in this paradox. In inner life, it is often letting go, not holding on, that creates the most profound change. Not when we strain, but when we soften, does a new movement emerge. The universe, on the grandest scale, seems to be undergoing something similar. Space is not being stretched by a specific force. It is expanding on its own, as if a gentle pressure were arising from within. To make sense of this, humanity had to return to very old ideas once set aside. A constant added early on to an equation, later crossed out as unnecessary, suddenly returned with an entirely new role. No longer a mathematical trick, but a possible description of reality itself. An energy bound to space itself, one that does not fade as space expands, does not thin out like matter or radiation. It remains there, uniform and patient, growing ever more dominant as the universe grows larger. What gives this story its depth is not only the phenomenon itself, but the timing of its revelation. In the early universe, when everything was small and dense, the gathering of matter ruled. But as space expanded over immense spans of time, as matter grew more diffuse, this evenly spread energy began to speak up. First as a whisper, then gradually as the leading voice. There is something strange in realizing that the fate of the universe is shaped not only by what once created us, but by something that increasingly governs the future. Galaxies that were once held together within invisible frameworks now begin to drift apart, not because they are fleeing, but because the space between them is growing. Like dots drawn on a sheet of rubber being stretched, each dot does not move on its own, yet the distances between them increase. Seen this way, the universe's acceleration is not violent. It is not a second explosion. It is a gentle, irreversible process, an expansion that requires no direct push, only the nature of space itself. And it is precisely this gentleness that makes it so contemplative. There is no drama, no sound, yet its influence is all-encompassing. Here, science must once again accept a difficult but necessary truth. Our understanding of reality is still missing crucial pieces. We can measure the rate of expansion. We can track how it changes over time. But the nature of the energy driving it remains beyond our grasp. It has a name, but not an essence. It is measured, but not yet touched. This lack of understanding does not weaken the story. It humanizes it. Standing before an accelerating universe, humanity is no longer a master or a quick decoder. We become humble observers, recognizing that even our most basic assumptions, that everything must eventually slow down, can be overturned. There is a clear philosophical depth in this reversal. It reminds us that reality has no obligation to follow human intuition. What feels reasonable to us is shaped by our narrow slice of experience. The universe, with its nearly limitless scales of time and space, follows laws that our intuition has only begun to brush against. In meditation, there are moments when we realize that thoughts do not always move the way we want them to. The more we try to control them, the farther they drift. When we let go, a different clarity appears. The story of the universe's acceleration carries a similar lesson. When we stop forcing the universe to make sense on our terms, we begin to see it as it is. The presence of this evenly distributed energy changes how we imagine the future. Structures that were once gathered and stable slowly drift apart, not suddenly, not catastrophically, but gradually, over billions of years. The skies of civilizations far in the future may look very different from ours today. Fewer stars, fewer signs of a vast universe. Not because the universe has become poorer, but because distances have grown too great. That thought may send a slight chill through the mind. Yet it also carries a quiet beauty. Everything has its time, a time for gathering, a time for stability, and a time for expansion. The universe does not privilege any one state forever. It moves slowly, according to laws deeper than the desires of any being living within it. And in this movement, humanity is once again invited into a familiar posture, listening, not rushing to conclusions, not fearing the reversal, simply observing with a softened mind. Because, as in meditation, when a new sensation arises, the first response is not to label it, but to feel it. The shock brought by the universe's acceleration does not undo what we have already learned. It places it within a wider context. Gravity still matters. Invisible structures remain the foundation of everything that forms. But alongside them, another factor is gradually taking the lead, one that does not pull things together, but allows them to move apart, each along its own path. In this feeling, the story of the universe begins to resemble the story of life itself. There are phases when we need closeness, support, and safe frameworks. And there are phases when we need space, openness, and separation in order to grow. The universe, in its own way, is moving through such phases as well. As you lie there, listening to this story, you do not need to understand every equation or concept behind it. What matters more is sensing the subtle reversal in rhythm, from pulling inward to opening outward, from heaviness to diffusion, from holding on to allowing separation. And in sensing this, the mind can slow. Not because everything has been explained, but because you realize there is no need to cling to a fixed picture of the universe or of yourself. Reality may be broader, stranger, and gentler than we once imagined. The universe is accelerating, yet it is not in a hurry. It is simply continuing its journey, opening space for the unknown, and inviting us to step into it with curiosity and calm. The future of the universe. Lonely, frozen, or torn apart. Once we accept that the universe is not only expanding but accelerating, once our familiar intuition that everything will eventually slow down has been overturned, the human mind naturally drifts toward a deeper, slower, and heavier question. If everything is moving farther apart, if space itself continues to stretch more and more, then where does this journey lead? Not tomorrow, not within our era, but across spans of time so vast that every memory, every civilization, every familiar trace has dissolved into silence. What will the universe look like then? This question is no longer purely scientific. It touches a threshold where physics meets philosophy, where equations become stories about destiny. Because when we speak about the far future of the universe, we are not only speaking about stars and galaxies. We are speaking about the meaning of existence in a world without observers. We are imagining a scenario in which even light itself may become lost. In one very gentle, yet very cold possibility, the universe continues to expand as it is now. No sudden catastrophe, no dramatic turning point. Galaxies drift farther and farther apart until their light no longer has enough time to cross the ever-growing distances. The sky of hypothetical future observers becomes sparser, darker. Stars continue to burn, but one by one, they fade. Not in agony, but through natural exhaustion. Heat disperses. Complex structures unravel. Everything gradually approaches a uniform, cold state, where no differences remain large enough to generate motion or change. The feeling this scenario evokes is not fear, but loneliness, a cosmic loneliness, where space is so vast that there is no longer any point of reference. Yet within that loneliness, there's also something deeply meditative. No tragedy, no abrupt ending, only an absolute settling, like a long breath slowly slowing until it nearly dissolves into the quiet backdrop of the night. But there is another possibility. Harsher, less forgiving. In this scenario, Expansion does not merely continue. It accelerates until it tears apart all structures. Space no longer just separates galaxies from one another, but begins to invade deeper bonds. Star systems, then planets, then even atoms themselves are gradually pulled apart. What once seemed inviolable suddenly becomes fragile, not because of an external blow, but because the fabric of space itself can no longer hold things together. If the previous vision resembles a deep, cold sleep, this one resembles total disintegration. Yet even here, what invites contemplation is not the drama, but its origin. There is no enemy, no collision, only the nature of space itself pushing beyond the limits that structures can endure. A complete farewell in which every bond, no matter how strong, must eventually release. In contrast to these two paths, there exists another possibility, one that aligns more closely with human intuition. In this scenario, expansion gradually slows, then stops, then reverses. Gravity, the force that once gathered matter to give birth to stars and galaxies, reclaims control. Space begins to contract. Distances between galaxies shrink. Everything moves toward a denser, hotter state, as if retracing the footsteps of its own beginning. This vision carries a sense of cycles, like inhalation and exhalation, like day and night, like birth and death flowing into one another. Yet even here, nothing guarantees a familiar rebirth. No one knows what happens at the end point of this contraction. Is it an absolute end, or merely a threshold into another state of existence? That question opens more doors than it closes. What gives all three of these paths their depth lies not in their differences, but in a subtle common point. They all depend on something we do not yet understand. The fate of all space and time, of every structure that has ever existed, seems to rest in the hands of an invisible factor, a fundamental property whose effects we can measure, but whose essence remains beyond reach. We know it is there. We know it shapes the rhythm of the universe, but its true nature still eludes us. There is profound humility in this realization. Humanity, with all its intelligence and tools, can peer tens of billions of light years away, can simulate the universe's earliest moments, yet must still admit that the final outcome of everything depends on something we cannot fully name. This is not a failure of science, but a testament to its honesty. Science does not promise certainty where none exists. On a contemplative level, this touches a deeply human question. If even the universe itself does not have a clearly predetermined future, if its fate remains open, what does that say about how we should live in the present moment? Perhaps it reminds us that uncertainty is not an exception, but the default state of existence. We often seek stability, assurance, final answers. But the universe, in its vastness, does not seem to operate according to that need. In meditation, there comes a crucial moment when we stop asking what will happen next and return to what is happening now. The distant future of the universe, whether cold, torn apart, or collapsing, is beyond our influence. But the present moment, the moment of breathing and listening, is fully here. This awareness does not make those future visions meaningless. On the contrary, it places them where they belong, as distant backgrounds that illuminate the value of the present. There is a quiet beauty in knowing that everything is finite, even the universe itself. Not because it saddens us, but because it makes every structure, every moment, every form of life more precious. Stars burn not to last forever, but to fulfill their role in a longer story. Humanity is the same. We appear in a very brief slice of cosmic history, Yet that slice is enough for us to ask questions, to reflect, to feel the beauty of being alive. When we imagine a future sky without distant galaxies in view, a gentle sadness may arise. But it is not despair. It is like the sadness of watching a sunset, knowing the light is fading, yet knowing that the fading itself gives the moment its depth. The universe may be moving toward a quieter state, but that does not make its vibrant phases any less meaningful. Within the stillness these future visions evoke, there is a gentle invitation to loosen our need for control. The universe did not ask our permission to expand, nor does it require our consent for its ultimate fate. And this, rather than unsettling us, can be liberating. We do not have to carry the burden of understanding or deciding everything. We only need to be present, to observe, and to live fully within the time we're given. As you listen to this, your mind may drift among distant images, fading galaxies, frozen space, or violent contraction. But if you return to your breath, to the feeling of your body being supported, you will notice something simple. The distant future does not change the truth of this moment. The universe may end in many ways, but the present is still unfolding, quietly, completely. And perhaps this is the greatest philosophical gift that cosmology offers here. It does not only give us overwhelming visions, it teaches us how to hold them in proportion. Against nearly infinite stretches of time, a single moment of awareness becomes more precious than ever. Not because it will last, but because it is happening now. The universe may grow cold, may tear itself apart, or may collapse inward. But while these scenarios remain open, still dependent on what we do not yet understand, one certainty remains: the human capacity to sit here, to listen, and to feel the wonder of existing within a universe that has not yet finished telling its story. And within that feeling, you may allow yourself to relax just a little more. You do not need to know where the universe is going in order to feel at peace. Sometimes, knowing that the story remains unfinished is enough to soften the mind, to loosen thought, and to let sleep arrive as a natural dissolving into the vast current of space and time. Black holes, where the laws of physics unravel after the mind has wandered long enough through distant visions of the universe's future, after imagining ever colder expanses, structures slowly dissolving or collapsing back into themselves. Another question naturally rises, deeper and darker. If the fate of all space depends on things we do not yet understand, then where does that lack of understanding become most unmistakable? Where do familiar laws not merely bend, but seem to lose their authority altogether? This line of contemplation leads, almost inevitably, to the darkest regions of the cosmos, places where prediction grows fragile and once solid concepts begin to tremble. There are places in the universe unlike any others, not because they are rare, but because they are extreme. There, gravity is no longer a gentle force keeping planets in orbit or gathering gas to form stars. It becomes an absolute pull, so intense that it bends space and stretches time in ways that defy intuition. These places do not reveal themselves through light. Instead, they appear as profound absences, regions where light enters but does not return, where the universe's story seems to be cut off mid-sentence. When a massive star reaches the end of its life, after burning its fuel for millions or billions of years, it can no longer resist its own weight. The outer layers collapse, the core contracts, and if the mass is great enough, no force remains to halt the collapse. This is not an explosion, but a falling inward, so deep that space and time themselves are dragged along. There, a boundary forms, not a wall, not a surface, but a threshold. Beyond that threshold, all paths lead inward. There is no return. This boundary is silent. It does not glow. Yet it stands as one of the most powerful ideas humanity has ever encountered. It marks the point where future and past exchange roles. Outside, time flows in familiar ways. Inside, every direction points deeper inward. And it is at this threshold that the two great pillars of modern physics begin to face one another with rare confusion. On one side stands relativity, which describes gravity as the shape of space and time. In this view, everything is smooth and continuous, governed by geometry. On the other side stands quantum mechanics, where reality is built from probabilities, tiny fluctuations, particles and fields that appear and vanish. Both theories have been tested with extraordinary precision in their own domains. Yet when placed side by side in the most extreme conditions, they stop speaking the same language. Black holes become the arena where these two perspectives collide head-on. According to relativity, whatever falls in is trapped forever, its information hidden behind that boundary. According to quantum mechanics, information cannot be destroyed. It may be scrambled or dispersed, but it cannot simply vanish. These two principles, each solid on its own, lead to conclusions that cannot both be true. And it is this contradiction that elevates black holes to the intellectual climax of the cosmic story. For a long time, black holes were thought to be eternal graves, swallowing everything and holding it in silence. But then a new perspective emerged, not from direct observation, but from listening to the tiniest tremors of the vacuum itself. Even in the emptiest regions of space, quantum fluctuations never cease. Pairs of particles and antiparticles constantly appear and disappear, in moments too brief to be directly measured. Near the boundary of a black hole, these fluctuations encounter unusual conditions. One particle may fall inward while the other escapes. From afar, it appears as though the black hole is emitting a faint breath, a dim glow not coming from infalling matter, but from the quantum structure of space itself. This realization profoundly changed how we see these dark regions. Black holes are not entirely silent. They whisper very softly over timescales longer than the current age of the universe. Yet this whisper carries an even deeper question. If a black hole can slowly lose mass and eventually vanish, what happens to the information about everything that fell into it? If the emitted radiation is purely thermal, carrying no trace of the past, then where does that information go? Is it erased or hidden somewhere we do not yet understand? This question is not merely technical. It touches the foundation of reality itself. If information can be lost, then quantum mechanics, with all its precision, may be incomplete. If information is not lost, then our classical picture of black holes must be revised. Whatever the answer, one of physics' great pillars must yield. And that is what makes this problem both unsettling and deeply compelling. There is something profoundly meditative about standing before such a paradox. It resembles the moment we observe a contradiction within ourselves, one that logic alone cannot resolve. The harder we try to force a solution, the more the contradiction sharpens. Only when we allow ourselves to remain with it, without rushing to conclusions, does a new space for understanding begin to open. In this sense, black holes are not just objects of study. They are teachers of humility. Over decades, Many ideas have been proposed, each attempting to preserve part of the familiar picture. Some suggest that information is encoded in extraordinarily subtle ways within the faint radiation, though we do not yet know how to read it. Others propose that the boundary itself is far more complex than it appears, possessing rich microscopic structure. Each approach opens a new door, yet none has led to a fully furnished room. What is striking is that the darkest regions of the universe have become the brightest illuminators of questions about the nature of space, time, and information. Places once thought to mark the end of understanding now serve as the starting point for the boldest ideas. Here, humanity begins to suspect that space and time may not be ultimate foundations, but emergent expressions of a deeper reality in which information plays a central role. On a contemplative level, this brings a curious feeling. What we once believed to be solid and self-evident can dissolve under sufficient pressure. Yet this dissolution is not destruction, but transformation. Like an old idea that no longer fits, it forces us to seek a wider perspective. Black holes, in all their extremity, are doing precisely this to physics. When we think of the universe's distant futures, of coldness or disintegration, black holes stand apart as a different kind of marker. They do not speak of the overall destiny, but of the limits of understanding itself. They remind us that no matter where the universe is headed, even now there are places the human mind has not yet reached. And it is this fact that keeps the cosmic story alive. There is a strange comfort in knowing that even our most successful theories have limits. It reminds us that understanding is not a destination, but a journey. Each time we believe we have grasped the larger picture, the universe reveals a shadowed corner, a paradox, an unanswered question. In meditation, there are moments when we touch a deep emptiness, where thought pauses, not because we understand everything, but because we accept that we do not need to. Black holes, in a very different way, invite us into a similar emptiness, not to abandon science, but to expand it beyond familiar frameworks. As you listen to this story in the night, you may not need to follow every detail. What matters more is sensing the rhythm of discovery, from distant stars to invisible foundations, to profound paradoxes. Black holes stand at the peak of this journey, not as answers, but as questions posed at the deepest level. And perhaps that is their most beautiful role, not to swallow everything, but to consume our overconfidence, not to end the story, but to force us to tell it in a broader, subtler way. In the stillness of the night, as the sky outside continues to shimmer with distant points of light, you may feel something very gentle arise. The understanding that not knowing everything is not a failure. That standing before a paradox without resolving it can bring an unexpected peace. Through its darkest regions, the universe is reminding us that mystery is not the enemy of knowledge, but its deepest source. And in that feeling, you may allow yourself to let go. There is no need to find the answer tonight. Black holes remain there, silent, holding their secrets. The universe continues to move, and you, in this very small moment, may rest. Knowing that living in a world still filled with things beyond our understanding is a wonder, not a burden. Is reality a hologram? After standing long enough before those dark regions where familiar laws no longer agree, after sensing the tension between the smooth descriptions of space-time and the uncertain fluctuations of the quantum world, a very natural feeling arises. Perhaps the problem is not that the two theories contradict each other, but that we are viewing reality from too narrow an angle. Perhaps what we call space and time, what seems most solid and fundamental, are not the deepest layer after all. And from this thought, an idea both strange and mesmerizing slowly emerges, like a doorway opening onto a completely different way of seeing the world. Imagine standing before a familiar three-dimensional image. When viewed from a distance, you see depth, volume, and distance. But as you move closer, you realize that the entire image is actually encoded on a flat surface. All the information about depth, structure, and motion resides on the boundary, interpreted by light into a sense of space. Reality, in this way, does not lose its richness. But the source of that richness lies somewhere very different from what intuition first suggests. This idea does not arise from imagination alone. It emerges from the most difficult questions posed by black holes themselves. When it became clear that the amount of information contained within a region of space does not scale with its volume, but with the area of its surrounding surface, something profound was unsettled. This contradicts the common feeling that inside is where everything is stored. The universe seems to whisper a different message. The essence may lie at the boundary. There is something deeply meditative in this reversal. In life, we often believe our true nature lies deep inside, within hidden thoughts, memories, and emotions. Yet sometimes, it is precisely how we interact with the world, the boundaries we form, the relationships we create, that reveal more about who we are. The universe, in its deepest operation, may be reflecting a similar principle. As physicists contemplated this, they began to imagine that the three-dimensional space we experience might not be fundamental reality, but an image emerging from a set of rules operating on a more distant, more abstract boundary. Every motion, every collision, every flow of time we perceive could be the result of subtler interactions, encoded at a deeper level we are not yet accustomed to naming. This perspective offers a new way to approach paradoxes that once seemed insurmountable. If information does not truly fall into an unreachable place, but is instead preserved on the boundary of a system, then the conflict between lost information and conserved information may only be a surface-level contradiction. Reality, at a deeper layer, could be internally consistent in a way our space-time intuition has not yet learned to follow. From these reflections, another bold idea emerges, one that connects pieces once thought unrelated. In the quantum world, there exist connections that do not depend on distance. Two entities can be linked so deeply that the state of one cannot be separated from the state of the other, even across vast distances. These connections do not transmit information in a familiar way. Yet they suggest that distance itself may not be the most fundamental barrier. If such deep connections truly form the foundation of reality, then space, the very thing we use to measure separation, may simply be how our minds interpret invisible relationships. Much like in meditation, when we realize that the boundary between inside and outside is not as clear as we once thought. The sense of inner space can expand or contract, not because the room has changed, but because perception itself has shifted. From this viewpoint, space and time are no longer fixed stages on which events unfold. They become emergent phenomena, concepts that arise when relationships grow complex enough. Just as temperature does not exist at the level of a single particle, but only appears when many particles move together, space-time itself may only appear when enough information and connection combine to create the illusion of continuity. This carries a strong philosophical depth. It challenges the idea that the external world exists as a rigid, independent structure, unaffected by how it is perceived. Not in the simplistic sense that everything is imaginary, but in a subtler way. Reality has layers, and the layer we experience daily may be the outcome of deeper, more abstract structures. There is a gentleness in this way of seeing. If space and time are emergent, then their bending, stretching, or even breakdown under extreme conditions becomes less frightening. It is like a dream shifting scenes, not because the dream has broken, but because its foundation is not bound by familiar physical limits. In meditation, there are moments when time seems to slow down or lose meaning altogether. A minute can feel like an hour, or an hour can pass like a single breath. Not because the clock has changed, but because the structure of experience has shifted. Seen this way, the idea that time itself may be emergent no longer feels so distant. It becomes a cosmic version of something we occasionally touch within consciousness. When these reflections are woven together, a very strange picture appears. The reality we inhabit may resemble a story told from the edges, where the deepest connections are encoded, then projected into space, time, matter, and motion. We are not outside the story. We are part of it, both characters and expressions at once. This does not make the world any less real. On the contrary, it makes it more wondrous. A three-dimensional image is no less real because it is encoded on a flat surface. A dream is no less meaningful because it arises from neural impulses. Reality, in this sense, does not need to be fundamental in a rigid way in order to matter. There's a subtle sense of liberation in accepting that space and time may not be the final foundation. It allows us to loosen our grip on familiar concepts, to stop panicking when they begin to waver. Instead, we can see that wavering as a sign that we are approaching a deeper level of understanding. And it is precisely at this deeper level that science and contemplation meet once again. Science, through mathematics and reasoning, suggests that reality may be structured differently from what our senses report. Contemplation, through direct experience, has long shown that what we perceive does not always reflect the whole truth. Two paths, seemingly far apart, converge on a single invitation: to look at the world with greater softness. As you listen to this story in the night, you do not need to picture the equations or models behind it. What matters more is sensing the shift in the question itself. No longer only, what is the universe made of, but how does reality appear? No longer only, what lies inside, but what exists at the boundary. In that feeling, the mind can slow. Not because everything has been explained, but because you realize that reality does not need to be grasped through rigid concepts. It may be richer, more flexible, and gentler than we once believed. An image emerging from deep connections, where distance, time, and matter are simply ways the story is told. And if that is so, then you lying here, listening to these words, is also part of that story. Your awareness, the passing thoughts, the faint sensations in your body, all are expressions of a larger, subtler structure. You do not need to understand that structure in full in order to belong to it. Perhaps, in the stillness of this moment, you can allow yourself to release one final question. What is reality, ultimately? Not because the question lacks importance, but because sometimes remaining with the question, without rushing toward an answer, is the deepest way to touch reality itself. The universe may be an image encoded on distant boundaries. Space and time may be emergent phenomena. Deep connections may be the true foundation. But right here, within the slow breath and gentle attention, reality is still unfolding, complete and sufficient. And in that feeling, you may rest, allowing the vast ideas to fade softly into stillness, like a three-dimensional image slowly dissolving as the light dims, making room for deep, gentle sleep. Why is there something instead of nothing? When the idea of reality as something that may emerge from deep, underlying connections is still gently resonating, when space and time no longer feel as rigid as we once believed, an ancient question suddenly becomes strangely intimate. If everything can arise from such subtle and abstract structures, then why is there anything at all in the first place? Why is there not an absolute emptiness, no form, no motion, no story? This question belongs not only to science or philosophy. It touches the deepest human sensibility, where existence itself asks why it exists. To move closer to this question, we must return to a very early moment, when the universe had no stars, no galaxies, no familiar structures. At that time, energy was everything. From energy, matter and antimatter emerged in pairs, like two symmetrical faces of the same coin. Every time a particle was born, an opposing partner appeared alongside it. Intuitively, one might expect everything to cancel out, leaving behind a smooth sea of light, uniform, formless, without history. Such a universe would be clean, perfectly balanced, and structurally empty. But the universe we inhabit is not like that. There are stars, there are planets, there are atoms, molecules, and structures complex enough to ask questions about themselves. This could only happen if, somehow, that original symmetry was broken. Not by a violent blow, not by an obvious bias, but by an extremely small deviation, so subtle it is almost negligible. Among billions of matter-antimatter pairs, only one extra particle of matter was needed. Just one. That tiny remainder, after everything else annihilated itself into light, became the seed of the entire cosmic story. There is a quiet beauty in the fragility of that moment. The entire night sky, every star you have ever seen, every thought you have ever had, depends on a difference so small that, written down, it might look like a rounding error. Not a grand design, but a hairline crack in perfect balance. And it is precisely that crack that allowed everything to happen. Here, science and contemplation meet at a very deep point. Science tries to describe how that asymmetry arose, tracing delicate processes in the earliest moments of time. Yet even as models grow increasingly detailed, the question, why, continues to hover. Why was balance not perfectly maintained? Why not a neat zero, but a tiny excess? Science can point to mechanisms, but the ultimate reason still seems to lie beyond reach. In meditation, there are moments when we realize that inner life does not arise from perfect equilibrium. If the mind were completely flat, without fluctuation, without imbalance, there would be no awareness, no experience. It is precisely the small oscillations, the slight asymmetries in thought and in feeling, that create depth. In some way, the universe appears to operate by the same principle. Absolute perfection produces no story. The tiny deviation does. This leads to a strange reflection. Perhaps nothing is the more stable state. Cleaner, simpler, easier to predict. But precisely because it is so stable, it allows nothing to happen. Something, with all its complexity and uncertainty, requires a rupture, a refusal of perfect balance. And that refusal, though minuscule, carries the weight of all existence. Seen this way, the question, why is there something, is no longer a distant abstraction. It becomes a reminder that existence is not guaranteed. It is the outcome of fragile conditions, microscopic choices of nature, moments that, had they gone just slightly differently, would have left the story untold. There is deep humility in this realization. We do not stand on the ground of absolute necessity. We stand on the ground of a possibility that happened to be realized. The universe could have remained silent. It could have ended at the very beginning in pure light. But it did not. A tiny asymmetry tipped the balance, and from that, everything began. Here, philosophy ceases to be mere play with concepts. It becomes a contemplation of the value of fragility. If all existence depends on a minute remainder, then every moment of being carries the mark of contingency and preciousness. Not because it is rare, but because it did not have to exist at all. In human life, we often search for grand reasons, clear purposes, definitive answers. Yet the story of the initial asymmetry suggests something else. That sometimes what matters is not a majestic plan, but a barely perceptible tilt, a deviation so slight it is almost invisible, yet sufficient to open an entirely new path. When you reflect on your own presence, this thought may bring a very particular feeling. You are not the result of rigid necessity. You are the result of a chain of conditions that almost did not happen. That does not make existence meaningless. It makes it deeper. Every breath, every thought, every moment of awareness is a continuation of a story that began with a tiny imbalance at the dawn of time. There is something profoundly meditative in staying with this question, without rushing toward a final answer. Why is there something? May never receive a complete explanation. But asking it, allowing it to resonate in the quiet space of the mind, is itself part of the story. It allows us to feel the wonder of existence without needing to justify it. The universe does not explain itself in the way humans might hope. It does not offer a clear reason, does not hang a sign saying why at the beginning of the tale. Instead, it leaves traces, small asymmetries, subtle clues, and from those clues, we weave our questions, our models, our reflections. In meditation, there comes a moment when we stop trying to understand and begin to feel. Perhaps, with the most fundamental question of existence, a similar attitude is needed. Not to abandon intelligence, but to complement it with stillness. To allow the question to be present without forcing it to close. As you listen to this, you may feel a deep settling. The thought that the entire universe, with all its complexity, arose from a tiny imbalance can slow the mind. Not because everything becomes simple, but because we realize that this complexity does not need to be carried by personal effort. It has already unfolded, is unfolding still, whether or not we fully understand it. And in that stillness, the question, why is there something instead of nothing, can transform. It no longer feels like a challenge to overcome, but an invitation to contemplate, an invitation to see existence not as a given, but as a fragile gift, shaped by exquisitely delicate conditions. Perhaps it is precisely because existence was not inevitable that it carries such weight. Because the universe nearly had no story, the story becomes worth listening to. And because everything depends on a tiny remainder, each moment of presence holds immense value. In the quiet of the night, as you lie there and let these thoughts pass, you do not need to carry them as burdens of knowledge. You can allow them to fade, like starlight dissolving at dawn. What matters is not holding on to every answer, but feeling the depth of the question itself. The universe might not have existed, but it does. You are here, and in this very small pocket of time, that presence is enough. No further explanation is required. No justification is needed. It only needs to be felt, quietly and fully, like a deep breath in the still night, where existence itself becomes the gentlest answer to its own question. When the question of why existence exists has been gently set down, not because it has been fully answered, but because we have accepted staying with its fragility, another doorway quietly opens. If the presence of this universe depends on an almost imperceptible deviation, if the entire story could have turned out differently because of a tiny numerical shift at the dawn of time, then is this truly the only story? Or is it just one among countless others being told at the same time, in places we cannot see or touch, yet can still imagine? This thought does not arrive as a declaration, but like a thin mist. It does not force itself. It carries no drama. It comes naturally, the way imagination drifts when you lie still, moving beyond the walls of the room, beyond the familiar sky. Perhaps space did not expand just once. Perhaps the birth of a universe was not a single event, but a repeating rhythm. Regions separating, swelling, becoming distinct worlds, each carrying its own set of rules. In this picture, our universe is no longer the center, nor an exception. It is simply one note in a far greater harmony. Somewhere, there may exist regions where the constants are slightly different, where gravity is stronger or weaker, where light behaves otherwise, where the matter never manages to gather into stars. These regions may be entirely silent. No observers, no questions ever asked. And it is precisely this that makes the small region we inhabit special in a very humble way. Not special because it was chosen, but because it allows someone to notice it. There is great subtlety in this idea. We do not need to believe that the universe was created for us. We only need to acknowledge that we find ourselves in a place where conditions happen to align just enough for life to appear, for awareness to arise, for the question, why, to be spoken. Like someone waking at dawn, not because the sun rose for them alone, but because they were there to see it. The idea of multiple universes is not meant to overwhelm the story. It does the opposite. It releases the pressure to explain everything with a single answer. If there are many ways to exist, many configurations that could unfold, then the fact that our world looks the way it does is no longer a mystery that must be forced open. It is simply one possibility that came to be. And within that possibility, we are living. There is a clear sense of relief in seeing things this way. We do not need to carry the burden of understanding all of reality. We do not need to know what happens beyond what can be observed in order to feel at peace with where we are. Just as in meditation, we do not need to control every thought in order to rest. We only need to allow them to pass, without clinging, without resistance. When scientists reflect on worlds beyond our sight, they are not always searching for direct evidence. Often, they are simply following the logical consequences of theories already in hand. In doing so, science touches a realm very close to philosophy, a realm where the question of what could be matters as much as what is. And even if such other worlds remain forever beyond verification, the idea of them still has value, not as a claim, but as a wider context for our own presence. In that context, life is neither inevitable nor absurd. It is a possibility that occurred among countless others that did not. And that is precisely what gives each living moment its depth. Not because it is rare in a statistical sense, but because it was never guaranteed. As you lie there, listening to this story as it drifts toward stillness, you may sense a different kind of expansion. Not the expansion of space, but the expansion of perspective. Instead of trying to hold the entire picture, you can allow yourself to rest in a very small corner of it. The corner where breath comes and goes, where the heart beats steadily, where presence is enough. Seen this way, the idea of many universes does not pull us away from reality. It brings us closer. It reminds us that we do not need to be the center to have meaning. A star does not need to know its place in the universe in order to shine. A human being does not need to understand the structure of reality in order to live fully within the moment. There is a quiet beauty in accepting that the story is far larger than oneself. When we stop trying to be the keepers of the whole narrative, we can rest in the role of a small yet real character within it. No need to explain, no need to prove, only to be present. And then, as the night deepens, as the vast ideas begin to fade like stars behind thin clouds, a gentle whisper appears. You do not need to stay awake to follow the entire story. You do not need to remember every detail, every concept. Sleep is not an empty space where the story stops. It is another way of being inside the story, not through thought, but through release. Just as the universe does not need an observer to continue expanding, your mind does not need to remain alert to stay part of the flow. When you sleep, the body still breathes. The heart still beats. Deeper processes continue, quietly and precisely. Just as invisible structures support stars and galaxies, invisible structures within you are supporting sleep. Perhaps somewhere, other universes are opening, closing, telling very different stories. But here, in this moment, the story only needs to be small enough to hold you. The space of the room, the warmth of the blanket, the familiar rhythm of breath. There is no need to understand everything in order to feel at peace. No need to resolve every question in order to rest. The universe does not demand your constant attention. It allows you to close your eyes, just as it allows stars to fade so that others may be born. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you may notice something very gentle. You are not leaving the story. You are entering it in another way, no longer as a listener, an analyst, or a questioner, but as part of the vast rhythm itself. Sleep is not missing out. Sleep is letting the story continue through you, without words, without images, like a soft wave washing over the shore and retreating, leaving behind stillness. The universe, in all its vastness and mystery, does not need you to stand watch. It was here before you opened your eyes, and it will be here when you close them again. You can trust that, just as you trust your breath to find its own way in the night. And in that trust, you may let yourself sink a little deeper. Let the final thoughts dissolve. Let awareness soften. Let sleep arrive, not as an ending, but as a gentle continuation. Beneath the infinite sky, among countless possibilities, you are here. And right now, that is enough. Good night.